Hello, this is Jim Craig. I'd like to welcome you to my first ever Blender tutorial. It's on creating 3D models in Blender for printing. I recently acquired a 3D printer and I've been using Blender for a couple of years now. So let's get started first by bringing up Blender. We're going to start very simply. We're going to start by going into the top view. And we're going to keep the default cube, but we're going to move it to another layer. We're actually going to use it for measuring later. Oh, just a moment, I need to turn on my screencast keys. They don't always work really well, but they do help. For anything that does not show up on screencast, just look down here. You can usually find some information down here. But the first thing we're going to do, we're going to start very simply with creating a basic logo, turning it into a 3D model, and then exporting it and showing you some of the pitfalls that can happen. So let's find background images. Let's add an image. I had one that I used earlier. Because I have a PrinterBot simple, we're going to do the PrinterBot logo. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. This tutorial assumes that you have some basic understanding of how to use Blender, how to do extruding, and a little bit about normals, although I will talk about that. Now I'm also not using an actual mouse, I'm just using the trackpad. So if every once in a while when I go to zoom things go off track, just bear with me. So we're going to, yep, that's what happened. Let's go back to view, top. And we're going to just make the P and the B for the PrinterBot logo. So we're going to start by adding a bezier curve. Some people call it bezier. And we're going to edit that, so tab to start editing. Now we're going to change those handles into vectors. So set handle type to vector. And we don't want anything except the normal, so don't worry about that. We're just going to normals. And we're going to start and we're going to work counterclockwise. So let's take the vertex on the left, we're going to move it down here onto the line, and pretty much what we're going to do is we're going to trace. Using the G key, we're going to move this vertex up. Now we're going to put in several vertices around the corner here. The more vertices you put in, the smoother the corner will be, although I've discovered in 3D printing it's really pretty forgiving. So just start extruding and going along the line. E for extrude, and then just move it along the line. Now we've gotten onto another straight line, so it's pretty easy. Just E and stretch it all the way over. Extruding around another curve. We may have to scroll down to make sure that we can get this all the way down there. So. And yes, this is kind of tedious, but it's a step that's worth taking. I will also explain in a little bit why I'm going counterclockwise. And if you don't get exactly on the line, you can always go back and edit it, move the vertices around as you need to. We're going to stop just shy of closing the loop. That's what we're trying to make, is a big loop. So take it right to there and stop. Now tab out of it. You can see we've got a pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good model of the P. Now we're going to zoom back in. We're going to hit Alt-C and convert it from a mesh to a mesh from a curve. Now we're going to tab in. We're going to take the first and the last of the vertices, hit the letter F, and put a face and connect those. So now we have a closed loop. But if you go to render it, you're not going to get anything because it has no dimension or no faces. So we're going to select all by tapping A. You may have to tap it twice. We're going to make one great big polygon here by hitting F. We now have a face. But now it's a flat object. Do a quick render here. It doesn't have any depth. So we're going to hit E to extrude, E, then hit Enter. Now we're going to move it up along the Z-axis by hitting G, Z. You'll notice down here in the right corner, we've had some things change. We're going to hit 0.5. And now if we render it, it has depth. But you may have noticed, excuse me, you may have noticed that our original logo has a hole in it. So we need to put that hole in it. So let's tab out. We're going to hit Z so we can see through it. And we're going to add a circle. Now this is going to be a mesh circle, not a, well, not a curved circle. We're going to go up to Mesh, Circle. Now we're going to try to line that up on the circle in the P. So hit G, and try to center it as well as you can. Now we're going to tab, and we're going to scale it so it's the same size. This will also allow us to move it around. So let's zoom in, see if we can get it exactly where it needs to be. It's actually pretty close. Now we need to give it a face, so F for face. Now we're going to move it down below our original mesh because this is going to cut through that mesh. So G, Z, -1. Now we're going to extrude it, so E, hit Enter, then G, Z, 2. Now if we render this, you're going to see we have a cylinder that goes through our original mesh. So tab out of that. Now select the first mesh for the P. Come over to our modifiers tab. And that's the little wrench that you see right here. Add modifier, Boolean. We don't want intersection. We want difference. In other words, we want the second thing that we select to be cut from our original mesh. Under Object, it's Circle. Now you'll notice we've got some lines that have come in here. That's one way to know that it has succeeded. So we're going to hit Apply. And we're going to grab our original cutter. We're going to move it over because we're going to use it again when we make the hole in the B. Let's render. You can see now the P has a hole in it, and the cutter is standing by waiting for us to make the next letter. And I'm going to pause the video now because you don't need to watch me put this together. Okay, well I've made the B, and we're picking up where I left off before the break. And something you'll notice is that the P and the B aren't the same color. I'm going to show you what happens when I try to do the Boolean on the B. So we're going to do difference. Object is going to be that circle. And it looks really, really strange. And the problem is the normals. So let's delete that. I'm going to tab in. We're going to select all. I'm going to recalculate those normals. And now you'll notice the P and the B are the same color. The normal is basically the face that's supposed to be pointing outside to the outside world. When you put your original Bezier curve down, the reason I go counterclockwise is to make sure that the normals are on the outside where they belong. So now if we add the modifier, do the Boolean, difference, and put the circle. Now let's move that circle out of the way. Oops. Why did we not get that? Let's hit apply. Now let's move the circle out of the way. There we go. In fact, we can now delete the circle, and we have the logo. Now we're going to go up to File, Export, STL. And this is the native format that's used by 3D printers. So I'll put in my 3D prints. There's a tutorial STL. Now let's open up the software that I use. I use Rapidie Host Mac. I'm going to add an STL file, and it should bring up tutorial. Apparently it's saying it's an invalid format. Let's try that again. Oh, I know what the problem is. We need to join these. And tab out all. Make sure that all their normals are correct. Tab out of that again. Let's try export. STL. Tutorial STL. Let's try to load it again. And you'll notice it's very tiny. And that's because Blender units, let's go back into Blender, these units, each of these squares, I have calculated it out, and they come to about 1 millimeter. So at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, call it 8.5 millimeters, that is roughly 1/4 of an inch across. You're going to want it to be much bigger than that. Actually, it's closer to 1/3 of an inch. So we're going to want to scale this whole thing up by a factor of about, say, well, it's 8 millimeters. We don't want it 80 millimeters. Say we want it 64 millimeters. Let's scale it 8 times. Now export it with the same name. If you go back into Rapidie Host, it's going to say that it's changed, reload it, tell it yes. And now you'll notice it's much larger. You center the object. Now to see if it actually would print properly, go to Slice. So hit Slice with Slicer. And this shows you how it would print out. Of course, we don't want to have it print separate objects like that. So we're going to add a pedestal to it. So let's go back into Blender. I'm actually going to shrink that whole thing back down again. So hit Alt-S, that gets rid of all of the scaling. So hit Shift-C to get our cursor back in the middle. And we're going to view from the top again. By the way, we can get rid of our background image now. We no longer need it. So we're going to add a plane. So add a plane. We're going to scale that in the X, and we're going to take it out to 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to take it out to 5. That's going to make this thing 10 millimeters across. And that way, if we figure out how big we want to make it, it's just a very simple multiplication. So tab it, we're going to scale X, 5. And then let's see, for Y we want it to be, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, let's just do it 5 by 5. So scale Y, 5. And don't worry, actually, the Rapidity software will actually center this on your print bed. But again, we're in a situation where we have it sitting on a two-dimensional surface. Hit extract, hit enter, go Z minus 0.5. Now I'm going to join these, but you'll notice I haven't changed the normals, and I'll show you why. So first, join, it's another one object, file, export, STL, back to Rapidity host, yes, back to object placement, and you'll notice that they are different colors. We're just going to scale this up here for now, make it 80 millimeters across. Hit center objects. You notice different colors. Now watch what happens when you hit slicer. It doesn't know what to do with it because it doesn't understand the normals. So if you go back into Blender, tab, hit all, recalculate vertices, export STL. Now you notice it's all the same color. If you slice it again with slicer, you have what it was you were looking for to start with. And that's really the big thing when you're going from Blender is scaling. So we're going to actually scale that back to 1. I want this thing to be 50 millimeters or roughly 2 inches across. So we're going to scale 5, file, export STL, and it's not exactly, but it's pretty close. It's like 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 2.5, so it's 25. So that's actually 5 centimeters across. Slice it with slicer. And we print up pretty quickly, pretty nicely. 16 layers. So I'm going to print this thing up and then show you how it looks. Well, here's the print on my perpetually messy and rather dinged up workbench. And one thing I want you to notice here is I said this would be 50 millimeters or 5 centimeters across, and there it is, pretty much right on the money. But you can see it printed up fairly well. I still have a lot of work to do as far as learning how to use my 3D printer. I haven't had it very long. But this was the model that you saw created. No alterations, no scaling. This is exactly the way you saw it. So I hope you find this useful. If you've got a 3D printer, you can use it for making objects that you can print out, or use Blender for making objects you can print out with your 3D printer. And they turn out pretty well. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below.